Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Issei become a solar god part 5. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video and also share this video with your friends. I have created my other videos playlist, there you can watch my all videos easily, check out as well. Let's start this video. Issei Hyoudou looked up at the sky as she walked over to her cousin's house. That's weird. It looks like a storm is coming tonight, but it looked so much sunnier earlier. Shrugging in nonchalance, Issei went to retrieve her own spare key to Issei's house. Twisting the doorknob around, Issei opened the door and widened her eyes at the first sight in her field of vision. Sitting on her cousin's couch was a pale-skinned female with long red hair and golden eyes. She was dressed in a biker vest on top of a red shirt and black biker shorts. On top of her red hair was a black Harley Davidson hat. Issei stood in shock, unsure of what to do about this unfamiliar person. The girl was laying down on her back with a magazine featuring motorcycles on the covers. The cousin of Issei blinked several times at the girl. Sensing another presence within the house, the girl moved her attention from her magazine to Issei. The red-haired girl narrowed her golden eyes in annoyance. "Oh, it's just you. What the hell are you staring at, cousin-in-law?" the girl asked in a gruff, yet clearly feminine voice. Issei widened her eyes at the girl's tone of voice. She remembered someone else saying those annoyed words. Someone who could invoke the fears and terrors of any mortal it came across. Taking a step back, Issei almost collapsed when she nearly bumped into the door. The Great Red. The Apocalypse Dragon raised an eyebrow at Issei, who looked on in horror and confusion at the new appearance of the dragon. "Who else were you expecting?" the true dragon asked in a bored tone. "In the underworld." As he watched Roswus and the others summon a portal which served as transportation, Issei turned to look at the sealed Loki, who seemed to be in a state of shock. The evil Norse god couldn't believe what had just happened to him. He had lost. He had lost to a mere child, and it was all because of himself. He had been hoisted by his own petard. The second I mentioned the power within my son's fangs, the outcome was in Issei Hyoudo's favor. How could I have been so foolish? While Loki occupied himself in his thoughts, Issei walked over to him, watching the blood flow from behind the Norse god. The young man narrowed his eyes when he noticed that Fenrir's fang was still embedded within the Norse god's back. Narrowing his eyes further, Issei reached into the seals and went to grip the fang. Loki widened his eyes at the unexpected pain and shuddered when he noticed that Issei was right behind him. "What the hell are you doing?" "Claiming my prize," Issei stated before he ripped Fenrir's fang out of Loki's back. Loki screamed as he felt his back pierce in pain once again. Holding the bloodied fang of Fenrir, Issei looked over to see the wolf himself. Thanks to Roswus, Fenrir was sealed as well, rendering him harmless. At the sight of Issei, the wolf actually drew back, preferring to stay within his seals. "By Issei." At the call of his name, Issei turned to see Office walking towards him. The Ouroboros dragon tilted her head as she spotted Fenrir's fang in Issei's hand. "By mate. Why do you have the fang of the Norse god spawn?" Office asked as she sent her emotionless gaze to Issei. Issei looked at the fang of Fenrir with a curious expression on his face. "I guess I want to keep it as a reminder." "A reminder? Well, let me rephrase that. I guess I want to keep this as a trophy." It was very brief, but Issei noticed that Office had raised an eyebrow in confusion to his statement. "A trophy? For what reason?" Issei looked back at the Norse god, whose eyes twitched at the bleeding and pain from his back. "For winning against my first god. Issei's house. What the hell happened to you?" The Great Red, now in a female form, yawned as she listened to the shocked Issei. "I was bored." "Bored? Yeah? Is there an echo in here or something?" Ignoring the Apocalypse Dragon's quip, Issei shook her head to clear her thoughts. "This can't be happening. I thought he was a boy. Why is he a girl? Did he get a sex change operation or something?" Looking at Issei with a bored look, the Great Red got into a standing position. "Life has become a little bit boring while I've resided in the dimensional gap. Even the thought of doing tricks in my home doesn't sound as fun anymore. So I decided to try something new for once. By transforming into a shem. The form is female, you know." Great Red interrupted in an almost offended tone. Issei stared wide-eyed at her cousin-in-law and turned around so that the Great Red couldn't see her face. "I can't even believe we're having this conversation. You're the one who's making a big deal out of it. How can you even know what the hell is your true gender anyway?" Issei asked, her patience almost leaving. A dark and terrifying smirk grew on Great Red's face. "My true gender, you ask? We dragons are born out of energy, so technically we have no gender, but since I don't care about logic, I will tell you that I am actually male. I have just taken upon a feminine incarnation to soothe my boredom. Shape and form have no meaning to us, cousin Issei. I can take and assume any form I want to. Why? The smirk on Great Red's face widened in smugness. Because I'm just that badass. It's so weird seeing you as a female. It's creepy. Nobody asked for your opinion. The Apocalypse Dragon responded with an annoyed look. Before Liko could respond, a thought suddenly came to her mind. Wait. You said dragons were born out of massive surges of energy, right? So someone actually was listening. I'm impressed. The Great Red mockingly stated as she looked back at her magazine. So that means Office isn't no, it can't be. The Great Red removed her attention back to her cousin-in-law and smiled mischievously. Yep, Office is genderless. Like I said, dragons technically have no gender, but like I also said, screw logic. So in reality, your cousin is actually married to Cthulhu. Hey. Office is your your sibling. So? Office has been calling me Baka Red since we were born. I still can't believe we are having this conversation. I still can't believe you're not shutting up about it. You know what? Before Liko could finish her threat towards the Great Red, a portal suddenly manifested into Issei's living room. As Liko stared in amazement at the portal, the Great Red's body glowed until the light disappeared. The Great Red had reverted to his male incarnation. The Apocalypse Dragon narrowed his eyes as he spotted a figure climbing out of the portal. Liko widened her eyes at the man, who lifted his head up and smirked darkly at Issei's cousin and the Apocalypse Dragon. The Apocalypse Dragon. It's so nice to meet you. The man greeted as he mockingly bowed. Great Red narrowed his eyes as he stepped in front of Liko protectively. Smiling widely, the man lifted himself up and crossed his arms. So this is where my nephew lives. Liko widened her eyes in surprise at the man's words. Nephew. The man smirked wider as he looked over to Liko, who recoiled at the man's leer. This woman seems to be frightened of me. Tell me, my dear. Do you like combs? Heaven, Akihabara. Are you sure you don't want to come with Office? Office tilted her head as she looked around the Cafe of Heaven. She remembered what the goddess of the sun and the universe had told her about the meeting with Michael and Gabriel. Perhaps this is the event my mother-in-law conversed with me about. There is no point in me being here with my mate. Even if I desire to be with my Issei for this event, I shall not participate in the meeting between Amaterasu and Issei. The Ouroboros dragon shook her head in response to Issei's question. No. I shall not accompany you. The angels wanted to converse with you only. I am not involved with either Michael or Gabriel. Issei blinked several times in response to Office's answer. Sending Issei a slight smile, Office moved forward to lock her lips on Issei's own. The young man widened his eyes when he felt the Ouroboros dragon's tongue gripping his own. Seconds later, Office released her lips from Issei's and lifted up her finger and tapped Issei on the cheek. I shall see you later. And with that the Ouroboros dragon transmitted away, leaving Issei at the Akihabara cafe. Issei Hyoudou. Issei turned around to see Gabriel and Michael sitting at a nearby table. Nodding to the two of them, Issei walked over to sit at their table. Gabriel-san. Michael-san. Gabriel smiled as she looked at Issei. On the outside, she seemed to be cheerful, but on the inside she was greatly conflicted. Michael's droopy green eyes showed how he was feeling. But, he had called Issei to go to heaven for a reason. It was for an old friend. That old friend happened to be the major deity of the sun and the universe. Issei. It's good to see you. How have you been? Michael asked. Issei folded his arms on the table and he nodded. I've been okay. I pulled a fang out today. A fang? Gabriel asked in hesitance. Yeah? Did you want to see it? Issei suggested as he reached into his pocket. No, thanks. Michael said as he shook his head. The angel inwardly sighed in relief when he saw Issei retract his hand from his pocket. Issei, Michael began as he looked into the young man's eyes, there's someone we want you to meet. Issei raised an eyebrow at Michael's declaration. Meet? Is it an angel, devil, or a fallen angel or something? Gabriel shook her head in response to Issei's guessing. No. In fact, she's neither of those things. She? Issei thought as he sat up in his seat. One of the doors to the cage opened. Issei looked up to see a woman with long black hair and almond-shaped brown-black eyes. She was dressed in a robe that featured Japanese symbols, her long black hair billowing against it. Issei widened his eyes when he sensed the woman's energy signature. Her power? It's just like the sun. Michael and Gabriel remained silent as they watched the woman walk towards their table. As the woman walked up to the trio, she set her eyes to Issei. Her brown-black eyes softened considerably and her face twisted a little in shame and heartbreak. Walking and stopping behind Gabriel and Michael, the woman set her gaze to Issei, who stared back in confusion. Who is this woman, and why does she have the energy of the sun? Her eyes starting to become wet with tears, the woman looked into Issei's eyes, seeing the great confusion within. It's been so long. Issei blinked several times in bewilderment. Does she know me? Far too long. the woman amended. Holding back the tears in her eyes, the woman's expression softened as she looked at Issei intently. At last we finally met. My darling little son. My baby. Issei gasped as his eyes widened in great shock. Issei's house. Great Red narrowed his eyes darkly at the man in front of him. Susanoo no Mikoto. The Shinto god of sea and storms. What are you doing here? The god of the storm smiled as he moved his attention from Liko and sent his look to the apocalypse dragon. Is it a crime to find my nephew for the first time? Who is your nephew and why are you here? Liko asked in great confusion. What a good question, but while we're on the subject, I'll unveil my answer. My nephew is the one called Issei. You know of him, right? Liko widened her crimson eyes in shock. Yuzutoko. Susanoo smirked widely. So you do know him and you called him your cousin. I don't sense any otherworldly energy within you, so you can't be related to him at all. What the hell do you want with Issei? Great Red demanded, almost losing his patience. The matter is very simple. I've come to take back the Ama no Murakumo no Tsurugi. Heaven, in Akihabara. The cafe of Akihabara was extremely silent. It was so quiet that not even a tumbleweed would have bothered to glide across the ground. Issei stared wide-eyed at the woman in front of him. He didn't recognize this woman at all. Her facial features, her energy signature were unfamiliar to him. Yet here she was, proclaiming herself as his mother. Well, what did you just say? Issei asked as he stared in shock. Amaterasu tried to compose herself and opened her mouth as she spoke her words out carefully. My little son. My precious little baby. Issei's heart beat rapidly and he almost found it hard to breathe. The woman took a step forward towards Issei, who backed away. My name is Amaterasu. She began as she put her hand on her chest. I am the ruler of the sun and the universe. And you are my little child. Issei felt his mind go completely blank. He felt so numb. He didn't know what to feel in this situation. He didn't know how to react. This has to be a trick. Mom and Dad told me I was adopted, but they never once mentioned who my real parents could be. Did they not know? In the midst of his own confusion, Issei looked up at the sun goddess and only started with wide, incredulous eyes. Amaterasu didn't react, as she knew her son wouldn't be happy at all to see her. I don't believe you. Issei hesitated, inwardly cursing himself for stuttering. Amaterasu, Gabriel, and Michael widened their eyes at Issei's statement. If you really are my mother, Issei began as he backed away, then why on earth are you introducing yourself to me now? Why wait so long? Amaterasu found it extremely hard to compose herself now, but she wouldn't cry. She had already done enough crying the day she left Issei at the Grand Ice Shrine. As she looked at her child, she could see the look of shock, sadness, pain, and hidden fury in his eyes. Because the thought of not being able to see you was too much to bear. Amaterasu responded softly. I made a terrible mistake in sending you to Earth, my little Issei. I was so foolish for doing that. I never should have done it in the first place. I don't care about you sending me to Earth. Issei interrupted as his frown became almost melancholic. I just want to know why you did it in the first place. It was for an irrational reason. Irrational reason? Issei asked, what do you mean, irrational reason? Amaterasu inwardly gasped at the cold tone in her son's voice. Her eyes starting to moisten, Amaterasu placed her hands to her side. It was all because of a grudge. Issei's house. The Ame no Murakumo no Tsurugi? Liko asked in puzzlement. Are you talking about the Kusanagi no Tsurugi? Why yes I am. Susanoo answered in amusement. That sword belongs to me. I claimed it for myself when I defeated Yamada no Orochi. When I split its tail open, the Ame no Murakumo no Tsurugi was trapped within it. From that day forward, the sword became mine to use. Great Rose raised an eyebrow at Susanoo's revelation. Yamada no Orochi, that bastard eight-forked serpent. It was said that you killed it. Though I don't recall that the sword was contained within it. Well, a lot of beings were unaware of the existence of the sword. The Yamada no Orochi wasn't exactly a sociable entity. Susanoo deadpanned. Glaring at the storm god, Great Red walked over to him. You gave that sword to your sister as a reconciliation gift, but now after so many years have passed, you suddenly want it back. Why is that? Susanoo smiled as he closed his eyes. I don't think it's any of your business, Apocalypse Dragon. When it involves Issei Hyoudou, then it is my business, dumbass. Great Red countered in an irritated tone. Chuckling in response, Susanoo waved his hands up in defense. Very well, I shall tell you. The reason is because of the presence of the Red Dragon Emperor. I know that Amaterasu sealed Drag within the Ame no Murakumo no Tsurugi. After all, the two heavenly dragons were born around the presence of Shinto gods. As she listened to the conversation between Great Red and Susanoo, Liko shook her head. Since she didn't interact that much with the world of the supernatural, she wasn't aware of the elements of the realm. Hell, her knowledge of the supernatural was very limited. I don't understand a single thing these two are talking about, and I still don't understand what is going on around here. Ever since I visited Isatoko, life hasn't been exactly normal. First, Isatoko becomes a Super Saiyan or something. Then I find out he's married to a dragon, which makes her my cousin-in-law. Then I found out that she had a brother, who is also my cousin-in-law, and now this guy says that Issei is his nephew. Liko inwardly sighed as she shook her head. It seems that every time Isatoko meets someone, or someone that happens to know him, they turn out to be another member of the family. Great Red narrowed his eyes further as he clenched his fists. Are you really dumb enough to believe that Issei is going to give the aim no Murakumo no Tsurugi to you willingly? Amaterasu passed the sword onto him. Susanoo rolled his eyes and crossed his arms. Of course she did. My idiot sister thought it would serve as a form of protection for Issei. With the Red Dragon Emperor sealed inside the sword, my nephew would no doubt become powerful. You said the two heavenly dragons were around the era of the Shinto gods. What of Albion? Does he know about you as well? Of course. Susanoo smiled in smugness. In fact, I guess you could say that Albion and I know each other. I'm honestly surprised that no one ever found out the reason why Drake and Albion were rivals in the first place. It is because Amaterasu raised Drake and I, in a sense, took care of Albion. Although the vanishing dragon was always stubborn and refused to listen to my orders. Dragons are always such a lost cause. Widening his eyes in fury, Great Red raised his fist back to deck the storm god until Susanoo reached behind him and pulled out a small needle. With blood on it. Almost immediately, Great Red pulled his fist back in shock. Is that? Susanoo smiled wickedly as he nodded his head. Yes, you recognize this blood, don't you, Apocalypse Dragon? This is the blood of Samuel himself. Liko widened her eyes at Susanoo's explanation. Samuel? Hold on, I've heard of him. He was the serpent that told Adam and Eve to eat the fruit of wisdom. He actually exists. Great Red twitched his eyes and gritted his teeth in great hatred. Despite he and office holding the title of being the most strongest and primordial existence in the universe, even they were not immune to the blood of Samuel. Calming down for the moment, the Apocalypse Dragon restrained himself. He would have to listen to the storm god's monologue for the time being. Smirking widely, Susanoo turned his attention to Liko. My dear, would you like to hear about Samuel? Liko narrowed her eyes on God. I already know who he is. She answered, he was the serpent who manipulated Adam and Eve. I know what he did. I'm afraid you don't. You see, Samuel is a mixture between a dragon and a fallen angel. He was indeed the serpent that tricked Adam and Eve to eat the fruit of wisdom. However, after that ordeal, God punished him by transforming him into a dragon and fallen angel hybrid and sealed him in the deepest trenches of the underworld. Gritting his sharp teeth, Great Red glared darkly at the god in front of him. How the hell did you get hold of Samuel's blood? Let's just say, Susanoo began as his smirk bordered on complete smugness, I got it from an organization I work for. Organization? Great Red and Liko asked simultaneously. Why yes. In fact, it's an organization dedicated to defeating the likes of you, Apocalypse Dragon. Narrowing his eyes at God's arrogant tone, Great Red almost lost his rare composure until a familiar voice made its presence known. If anyone is to beat the likes of Baka Red, it shall be me, Susanoo no Mikoto. Heaven, in Akihabara. The grudge? Issei almost screamed out in incredulity. The young man couldn't believe it. The woman who claimed to be his mother abandoned him all because of a stupid grudge. Issei didn't know if he should have felt insulted or just outright astonished. You removed your contact from me and sent me to Earth, all because you held a grudge against your brother. What was the grudge even about? Amaterasu kept her mouth shut as she waited for her son to, hopefully, calm down. She genuinely felt horrible for what she did to her child, and as she looked at him, she could tell he was trying to restrain himself from obliterating the area around him. Her little son's face was twisted in a combination of melancholy and bafflement. Issei continued to stare at Amaterasu with wide eyes. Why on earth would you do that? Issei yelled out. Even if your brother was dangerous, don't you think you could have hidden me away somewhere else? Why did you send me to Earth? Why? Issei's voice cracked, please tell me. Amaterasu almost felt her eyes water, but she was able to keep her composure up to a slight degree. Despite my grudge against my brother, there was another reason I sent you to Earth, my little son, but What was the reason? Issei asked, his tone almost desperate and pleading. He was angry, that was for sure, but he wanted to know. He wanted to know so badly. Why did she do this to him? Amaterasu gazed at her son with longing regret and genuine love. She couldn't tell him the true reason. Not yet. Her little son wasn't ready. Inwardly taking a deep breath, Amaterasu managed to compose herself. Because I wanted to find a way for the universe to retain life. What do you mean for the universe to retain life? Issei repeated in disbelief. In case something were to happen to me. If I was not around to supply the universe or the earth with the energy of the sun, then. Issei never thought it was possible for his eyes to widen even further than they had before. He felt his hands tighten as he struggled to control himself. So the reason I was born was because I was supposed to serve as your replacement. You wanted me to serve as the savior of Earth or something. Amaterasu watched her son carefully, listening fully to his words. Ever since I was little, the people of Earth always harassed me because of the appearance of my eyes. Every single day. I was so sick of it to the point that I wanted to be left alone. I wanted to be in a state of isolation forever. Looking into his mother's eyes, Issei's melancholic look morphed into a sharp glare. You're the reason I was so lonely as a child. The reason I was ostracized from everyone else. My little Issei, Amaterasu started. No. Issei interrupted as his face returned to its melancholic state. I can't listen anymore. The fact that I was created just to serve as a failsafe. No, you weren't, Amaterasu cried desperately in her mind, you weren't, my darling little son. His body shaking, Issei turned around, preventing his mother and the angels from seeing his face. His breathing growing ragged, Issei shook his head as solar flares began to spiral around his body and he quietly transmitted away from the cafe. Amaterasu stood still for a few moments and then her eyes finally released tears. Michael and Gabriel remained silent, finding themselves unsure and feeling awkward at the exchange between Amaterasu and Issei. At the Phoenix mansion. So Newbie's not here? Sorry. I actually forgot where he was going. Well, I guess Butchu is going to be disappointed. Aichu will probably be disappointed as well. She seemed really eager to talk to Newbie. So Nakaichu. Eager? Yeah, I'm surprised too. Shulin smiled as she led Yudo Kiba and Gentry Usagi to the door. She was a little surprised that out of all the places they could have checked to find Issei, they came to the Phoenix mansion. If Issei does come by, then I'll tell him you guys visited. She offered. Yudo and Saji smiled. Thanks. Yudo said. Yeah, thanks. We actually haven't seen Newbie in a while. Saji pondered as he walked out of the door. Closing the door behind her, Shulin sighed in tiredness. I wonder what they needed Issei for. She mused. That is an interesting question. A voice laced with an emotionless, yet dangerously seductive tone. Widening her eyes at the sound of the voice, Shulin turned around to see Office. Shulin raised an eyebrow in confusion. Hold on. She looks like Office, but strangely she looks different too. Tilting her head, Lilith looked around the mansion with a curious air about her. What do they want with our Issei? Our Issei? Shulin asked hesitantly. Almost instantaneously, Lilith sent her ringed eyes over to Shulin, who recoiled at how dark Lilith's eyes appeared to be. No. Issei belongs to me and my original. Original? Wait, do you mean Office? Nodding robotically, Lilith moved her attention to the living room table and tilted her head. In front of her was a plate of fruit. Picking a crimson apple, Lilith brought her lips to the apple and bit into it, allowing Shulin to see her sharp teeth. She's a lot creepier than Office. Issei's house. Susanoo narrowed his eyes and turned around to see the infinite dragon god with an emotionless look on her face. He then smirked widely and held the needle with the blood of Samuel behind his back. Ouroboros. It's such an honor to be in your presence. Office narrowed her eyes at the storm god. Before leaving Akihabara, she had dropped Lilith off at the Phoenix mansion in hopes that the clone's darker thoughts would fade away eventually, and now here she was, in the presence of Susanoo no Mikoto. You stated that you've come to retrieve the Kusanagi no Tsurugi from my mate. That is unacceptable. Chuckling, Susanoo spread his free arm outwardly. Maybe in your eyes, Ouroboros, but in my eyes, claiming the Kusanagi no Tsurugi is completely acceptable. After all, it was originally my sword. I merely gave it to Amaterasu to quit her whining and animosity. After that, I wanted nothing to do with the sword anymore. At least until I found out that she sealed the Welsh dragon within it. The Office glared at the storm god in annoyance, which only made Susanoo smirk wider. Of course, there is another reason I want my sword back. At first, when I defeated the Yamada no Orochi and claimed the Kusanagi no Tsurugi for myself, I thought the sword wasn't that special. Until I realized something spectacular. Office, Great Red and Liko remained quiet as they listened to Susanoo's next words. A portion of the Yamada no Orochi's soul was sealed into the Kusanagi no Tsurugi. By the time I gave the sword to Amaterasu, it was already too late. I assumed that she destroyed a portion of Orochi's soul when she incorporated Dryag's soul within the sword, but then I remembered that Yamada no Orochi was actually an intelligent creature. It can be assumed that it suppressed its energy signature and remained dormant for some time. Although she didn't show any signs of reaction, Office was genuinely curious. As she was the nothingness of infinity, she could sense the numerous life forces of the universe. It honestly shocked her that she couldn't sense the energy signature of the Yamada no Urachi. So my Issei has another creature that is sealed within his sword. The Urachi. That complicates things. I am puzzled that Drake has never once mentioned the serpent. I wonder, is he perhaps suppressing it from my Issei? Turning around to face the Great Red and Liko, Susanoo menacingly lifted the needle containing the blood of Samuel up to Great Red's face, prompting the Apocalypse Dragon to growl darkly at the god. As I was saying, Apocalypse Dragon. There is an organization that is dedicated to defeating you. It's dedicated to defeating you and the Ouroboros dragon as well. At Susanoo's threat, Office merely gave the storm god an annoyed glare. Smiling wider, Susanoo held up the needle with Samuel's blood further to Great Red's face. I never thought I'd see the day. The almighty Great Red, frightened of a tiny needle. Susanoo mocked gleefully. He then turned his attention to Liko, who looked back at him with her wide crimson eyes. Perhaps I'll turn you into a comb after I finish killing the Dragon of Dreams and the Ouroboros dragon. Before Susanoo could make true to his statement, a golden wave of solar flares spiraled in front of him and the Great Red. The golden waves of solar energy released a bright light that slowly faded to reveal a familiar figure. Removing his hand from his eyes, Susanoo raised an eyebrow in curiosity at the male in front of him. The male had orange-yellow golden hair that was spiked upwards and pointed in all directions. Susanoo raised another eyebrow in curiosity when he noticed that the male also had wing-like fringes in his hair. The young man was dressed in a red shirt, black pants, and brown dress shoes. Covering his red shirt was a black jacket that flared out from behind him. The aura of solar energy surrounded his body, giving him the appearance of a golden warrior. Blinking several times at the warrior, Susanoo gave him a dark smirk and chuckled. So this is how we meet. The first time I met my nephew, and here he is, protecting these worthless creatures. Gritting his teeth and widening his eyes in fury, Issei flared the aura of his super solar state, causing the house to shake. I won't let you escape within an inch of your life. Susanoo smiled as he lifted his hands up. A portal emerged above the people within Issei's house, bolts of lightning surrounding it. What a great declaration, my nephew. Come. Follow me so we shall commence our glorious battle. Susanoo declared as he jumped into the portal. Gritting his teeth, Issei went to jump into the portal as well, until he felt a hand on his shoulder. His aura flaring outwardly, Issei turned around to see Liko with a concerned frown on her face. Behind her was Great Red, who glared at the portal which transported the storm god. Isatoko. Liko frowned as she tried to sense some traces of calmness within her cousin. It always frightened her on how her cousin acted when he was in his transformed state. So fierce with uncontrolled anger. It was as though whenever he was transformed, all of his anger was being released. My, Issei. Liko widened her eyes to see Office with her hands on Issei's cheeks. The Ouroboros dragon's expression remained emotionless. Her eyes, however, showed her true feelings. She was honestly worried about her mate. As he turned around to face Office, Issei felt his aura recede just slightly. He threatened all of you. Issei began as his aura began to flare with intensity. I'm not going to let him get away with that. Tilting her head, Office sent her gaze up to Great Red, who also appeared to be a bit worried about Issei. Great Red. I saw you recoil from the storm god when he revealed the needle laced with Samuel's blood. Why did you step back? Rolling his eyes, Great Red scoffed and crossed his arms. Please Office, don't insult me. I wanted to hear the dumbass explain the full reason why we came all the way here. Believe me, I wanted to tear the god limb from limb. I just wanted to hear the full explanation why he was here in the first place. Besides, killing him would have been too easy. Office tilted her head again at her brother's explanation and set her attention back to Issei, whose aura was starting to recede. Issei. I sense a great amount of pain and confusion within my mate. Perhaps Amaterasu has finally introduced herself to him. The glowing light suddenly manifested within Issei's hand, revealing the Kusanagi no Tsurugi. Lifting his head up, Issei frowned. I'm going after him. He said quietly as he flew up towards the portal. As soon as he came in contact with it, the portal swallowed him whole, imploding upon itself. As she stood silently, Liko looked away as her crimson eyes softened. Isatoko. He looked so murderous, and yet, I saw so much pain in his eyes. The dimensional gap. The portal emerged within the dimensional gap, revealing the silhouettes of Issei and Susanoo. As he smirked widely at his nephew, Susanoo bumped his fists together, causing cracks of lightning to emit from his hands. His eyes widened when he noticed that Issei was holding the Kusanagi no Tsurugi. Issei narrowed his eyes as he glared at his uncle. The god mentioned merely smirked as he withdrew his hands. My nephew. I would like to add a little twist to this fight of ours. What kind of twist? Why, it's simple. That sword that you inherited from Amaterasu. Susanoo inwardly relished at the sight of Issei glowering at the mention of his mother. Kusanagi no Tsurugi originally belonged to me. I believe what I am trying to say is that I want it back. A mere child, not to mention an offspring of my wretched sister, does not deserve to carry the sword that I earned. Raising an eyebrow at his nephew's lack of response, Susanoo smirked and transmitted away. Appearing in front of Issei, Susanoo grabbed onto the sword. As soon as he had done so, a black aura began to cover the Kusanagi no Tsurugi. Issei narrowed his eyes as he looked at the sword beginning to change shape. Suddenly, a red-crimson aura began to take shape and envelop the Kusanagi no Tsurugi as well. At the sight of the crimson aura, Susanoo narrowed his eyes darkly. I see. The presence of the Red Dragon Emperor is trying to suppress the other beast sealed within. Issei's eyes widened a bit in confusion. The other beast? He wasn't aware that there was another beast sealed within the Kusanagi no Tsurugi. He assumed that only Drag Soul was encased. Narrowing his eyes further, Susanoo lifted his hand up, a bolt of energy in the shape of lightning appearing. Smiling wickedly, he went to strike Issei, who widened his eyes further and quickly summoned up a shield of solar energy. Susanoo scoffed and put more pressure within his lightning bolt, which began to pierce through Issei's solar shield. Your aura? It's far more erratic than that of Amaterasu's. The power of the primordial sun encased within the son of a pathetic Shinto goddess. It's amazing. Issei kept quiet as he tried to retain his solar shield. Smirking widely, Susanoo put more pressure on his attack. You've used this power to defeat those who have wronged you. I guess what they say is true. Sure as the sun rises the battle shall continue. His lightning bolt directly shattering Issei's solar shield, Susanoo grabbed Issei by the throat. Summoning another lightning bolt, Susanoo went to plunge it into his nephew. Before he could succeed, he saw Issei use his free hand to reach into his pocket. Just what are you pulling out? Narrowing his eyes, Issei pulled an extremely sharp fang and held it up high. Widening his eyes, Susanoo almost lost his composure. Almost. The fang of Fenrir. Gritting his teeth, Susanoo reared his fist back and plunged the lightning bolt into Issei's chest. Before the lightning bolt hit Issei directly, he was able to puncture Susanoo with the fang of Fenrir. Issei widened his eyes at the pain and he suddenly found himself out of his super solar form and he coughed out some blood. Wincing at the effect of Fenrir's fang, Susanoo closed his mouth to prevent most of the blood from flowing out. Suddenly, the spots of blood from Issei and Susanoo fell onto the Kusanagi no Tsurugi. The sword started to glow with an eerie aura and then it released a bright flash that illuminated throughout the dimensional gap. Issei's house. Hold on. So, you mean my Issei Toko is? Yes. My Issei is not a human. Well, I found out he wasn't human ever since he saved me from the underworld. I thought he was just some superhuman or something. Liko stated as she crossed her arms. Great Red huffed as he looked around the house. He then moved his attention to Office, who stood still in the living room. Suddenly a shadow resembling the silhouette of snakes emerged in the room. The shadow then formed into a formless substance until the mask gained a shape. Office's eyes remained cold as she witnessed her clone emerging from the shadows. Their thoughts have not cleared. They are becoming far darker than I had expected. Opening her ringed eyes, Lilith met the stares of her original, her brother, and her cousin-in-law. Liko blinked several times at the appearance of Lilith. Were her eyes always that way? The cousin of Issei suddenly felt a chill in the house. I don't know why, but Lilith seems darker. The last time I saw her, she seemed to act like a regular little child, but now, just by looking at her, I can't help but feel unsafe around her. Lilith, Office began, why are you back in our mate's house? Lilith tilted her head, her ringed eyes going over to Liko, whose eyes widened a little in wariness. Narrowing her eyes slightly, Office walked over to her clone. Lilith. Return within me. We shall have a talk within my own subconscious. Office noticed that Lilith's eyes seemed to have no traces of light within them. Nevertheless, Lilith converted herself into a form of energy and merged herself with Office. Feeling the presence of Lilith, Office closed her eyes. Office's subconscious. There was only nothingness within the mind of the Ouroboros dragon. Although she had thoughts and processes like most of the beings in the universe, there would always be nothingness within the infinite dragon god. As Office floated around within her subconscious, she spotted Lilith encased within a pyramid shield. She tilted her head when she noticed that Lilith was now in the form the Ouroboros dragon took when she first met Issei. Tilting her head again, Office sent her clone her usual emotionless look. Lilith. At the call of her name, Lilith looked up at her progenitor. Office's eyes widened just slightly when she noticed that Lilith's eyes were no longer ringed. In fact, the clone of the Ouroboros dragon's eyes were lighter than they had ever been. She also seemed to be frightened. Lilith. Original. I am frightened. The Ouroboros dragon raised an eyebrow in an expression akin to confusion. Frightened? What do you mean? Lilith's eyes seemed to take on a more childlike look as she placed her small hands on the pyramid shield. It is scary out there. The clone said in a soft and innocent voice. The infinite dragon god was genuinely confused right now. It seemed that Lilith was back to the original personality she had when Office had first introduced her to Issei. Are you frightened outside? Why? Office asked as she tilted her head. Lilith's eyes seemed to tremble, and she removed her small hands off the pyramid. When I was outside, the clone began as her face grew into a pout. I get scary thoughts. I am confused. Office stated as she looked at her clone curiously. Issei's subconscious inner world. Issei clutched his head as he looked around to see that he was in his inner world. Laid on the ground, Issei looked up to see an unfamiliar person looking down at him. It was a very beautiful and well-endowed golden-eyed black-haired pale-skinned girl with a large bust and voluptuous figure. Issei noticed that the girl's golden eyes seemed to have reptilian traits and that the girl was completely naked. Despite attempting to get up, the lightning bolt from Susanoo seemed to have a delayed effect than Issei had anticipated. He was finding it hard to keep himself from falling unconscious again. The girl slowly tilted her head all the way to the side, her neck making an eerie cracking sound. Her reptilian eyes widening slightly, the girl opened her mouth, revealing a full set of sharp fangs. Rolling her long tongue around her mouth, the girl went to bite down onto the boy laying below her until a crimson energy blast was sent her way. Hissing and narrowing her eyes darkly, the girl evaded the blast from the unknown figure. Regaining her balance, the girl hissed once more at the creature gliding towards Issei. Her reptilian eyes narrowed almost menacingly. His eyes opening once more, Issei looked up to see a large dragon with red scales and piercing green eyes. Brag scoffed as he looked down at Issei. Look at yourself, Baka. You almost got yourself killed by lying on the ground like a motionless target. Grunting, Issei felt himself lift up as Drag used his claw to help him up. Wincing at the pain, Issei looked down and his eyes widened. What the? Yeah, I imagine you're surprised. You got a hole in your chest. Courtesy of that damn uncle of yours. I don't understand any of this. Why, it's simple, my dear nephew. Widening his eyes, Issei looked up to see the god of the seas and stormed himself, floating above a nearby skyscraper. You? What are you doing here in my inner world? Smirking darkly in amusement, Susanoo pointed to the girl who stared at Issei with a wide-eyed spooky look on her face. I wasn't lying when I said that I wanted my sword back, and with the mindless soul of the Yamata no Urachi itself, I'll make that wish come true. Issei widened his eyes as he looked over at the girl. Yamata no Urachi? Drag, what's he talking about? With a crimson aura flowing around him, Drag grunted as he glared at the Yamata no Urachi. Sensing the hostility from the Welsh dragon, the girl growled as she began to morph. The next moments Issei would experience would be something that he would never be able to take back. The girl cried out as her body began to change into a monstrous visage. Her legs morphed into a long tail, and 7 more heads protruded from her neck. The heads seemed to have the appearance of snakes. The monster grew to a colossal size as it towered over the skyscrapers. Issei stared in awe at the monster in front of him, while Drag glared at the abomination. Smiling widely, Susanoo moved his attention back to Issei. This creature is the Yamata no Urachi. It was the monster that I destroyed with the Kusanagi no Tsurugi. However, it seemed that Urachi wasn't as dumb as I originally thought. Before I destroyed it, the Urachi had managed to seal a portion of its own soul inside the sword. What a foolish thing to do. The portion of its soul is but a mindless version of the original. It only obeys me. He then smiled as he looked over at Drag, who glowered back at him. Red Dragon Emperor. It's been a long time. Quit the pleasantries. I guess trying to suppress the Yamata no Urachi from your host is putting you into a bad mood. The Yamata no Urachi let out a roar as Issei's subconscious shook from the tremors. Looking over at Issei, Drag narrowed his eyes. Partner, are you alright? Partner, gritting his teeth, Issei let out a grunt as he transformed into his super solar state. Seeing his nephew transform, Susanoo let out a great laugh. This is absolutely great. The Red Dragon Emperor and the son of Amaterasu are fighting together. Looking over at the Yamata no Urachi, Susanoo crossed his arms. It is just as I said, son of Amaterasu. Sure as the sun will rise, the battle shall continue. Thanks for watching this video. Part 5 is over. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. And also check out the playlist that I have created and enjoy. Link is in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.